Take a deep breath. Today, you will learn English differently, not by memorizing long lists, not by studying for hours, but by training your brain to remember English naturally. Most English learners forget words quickly because they learn without real repetition. But today, I will show you 7 simple tips that can help English words stay in your mind longer. And while you listen, speak with me slowly. So, stay calm, listen carefully, and speak with me. I almost forgot to reply to that message. That idea sounds better than the first one. I didn't expect the meeting to take this long. She looked tired, but still smiled politely. The weather changed really fast this afternoon. I kept thinking about that conversation all day. He spoke so quietly. I could barely hear him. This place feels different at night. I wasn't ready for that question. Honestly, the movie started later than we expected. I noticed something strange on my way home. She didn't seem happy about the decision. I need a little more time to think about it. Everything became quiet all of a sudden. He always remembers small details somehow. I couldn't understand what he meant at first. That cafe was much smaller than I imagined. The room felt warmer after the rain stopped. I think we took the wrong road earlier. She answered the question without hesitation. I didn't realize how late it had become. Something about his tone sounded unusual. The lights turned off for a few seconds. He waited outside without saying anything. That explanation made everything much clearer. I've never seen the streets this empty before. She paused for a moment, then continued speaking. The bag feels heavier than it looks. I wish I had noticed that earlier. Nobody expected the plan to change suddenly. The sound was coming from somewhere upstairs. I didn't know the answer immediately. Her reaction surprised everyone in the room. The traffic was worse than usual today. I kept my phone on silent all evening. He looked confused for a few seconds. That message completely changed my mood. I almost missed the last train home. The music in the background sounded relaxing. I thought you already knew about it. She handled the situation very calmly. We stayed there longer than we planned. I could tell something was bothering him. The elevator stopped on the wrong floor. That restaurant used to be much quieter. I didn't recognize him at first glance. The train was delayed without any announcement. I wasn't expecting such a serious response. Someone left the door slightly open upstairs. Her expression changed the moment she read the message. The restaurant became unusually crowded after sunset. I nearly dropped my phone while answering the call. That comment sounded more personal than professional. He stared at the screen without saying a word. without saying a word. The atmosphere felt tense during the discussion. I couldn't figure out why everyone looked worried. She quietly moved her chair closer to the window. The conversation suddenly became more uncomfortable. I noticed a small mistake at the last second. He sounded confident, even under pressure. The streets were still wet from the earlier rain. Nobody reacted the way I expected them to. She folded the paper carefully and placed it aside. That answer created even more confusion somehow. I kept checking the time during the entire meeting. The elevator doors opened very slowly this time. He avoided eye contact for the rest of the conversation. The sound outside became louder every minute. I wasn't completely satisfied with the explanation. She leaned forward, as if she wanted to say something. The lights inside the building suddenly went out. I didn't realize how exhausted I actually was. That moment felt strangely familiar to me. He responded calmly. Despite the criticism, the line moved slower than anyone expected. I could hear people talking in the next room. She hesitated for a second before answering. The manager seemed unusually quiet this afternoon. I accidentally sent the message to the wrong person. The coffee tasted stronger than usual today. Nobody mentioned the problem during the meeting. He placed the keys carefully on the table. I didn't expect the situation to become this complicated. The background music made the place feel calmer. She looked away before finishing her sentence. The bus arrived much earlier than expected. I kept replaying that moment in my head. The office felt unusually empty this morning. He spoke carefully, choosing every word slowly. That decision changed the entire conversation completely. I couldn't hear clearly because of the noise outside. She remained silent for a surprisingly long time. The atmosphere became lighter after the joke. I wasn't prepared for such an emotional reaction. The hallway looked darker than usual tonight. He suddenly stopped talking in the middle of the sentence. The phone kept ringing, but nobody answered. I didn't notice the change until much later. She quietly closed the notebook and looked outside. The room smelled like fresh coffee and rain. He nodded slowly, without adding anything else. That question caught everyone completely off guard. I almost laughed at the wrong moment. The window was slightly open during the meeting. She sounded more confident over the phone. I couldn't concentrate because of the constant noise. The conversation ended more abruptly than expected. He picked up the paper, then folded it carefully. then folded it carefully. Something about the situation felt strangely uncomfortable. Something about the situation felt strangely uncomfortable. The hallway echoed with distant footsteps. The hallway echoed with distant footsteps. I didn't recognize the number on the screen. I didn't recognize the number on the screen. She adjusted her glasses before replying quietly. She adjusted her glasses before replying quietly. The traffic lights stopped working for several minutes. The traffic lights stopped working for several minutes. I kept thinking about his unusual reaction. I kept thinking about his unusual reaction. The cafe became quieter after midnight. The cafe became quieter after midnight. He leaned back and crossed his arms slowly. He leaned back and crossed his arms slowly. That explanation raised even more questions somehow. That explanation raised even more questions somehow. I nearly forgot where I had parked the car. I nearly forgot where I'd parked the car. The silence in the room felt uncomfortable. The silence in the room felt uncomfortable. She glanced at the clock, then sighed softly. She glanced at the clock, then sighed softly. The announcement confused several people immediately. The announcement confused several people immediately. I couldn't remember the exact details anymore. I couldn't remember the exact details anymore. He spoke more formally than usual today. He spoke more formally than usual today. The atmosphere changed after that short comment. The atmosphere changed after that short comment. I noticed the mistake right before sending it. I noticed the mistake right before sending it. She remained calm despite the sudden interruption. She remained calm despite the sudden interruption. The streets looked unusually empty after the storm. The streets looked unusually empty after the storm. I wasn't expecting such a direct answer. I wasn't expecting such a direct answer. He carefully placed the documents inside the drawer. He carefully placed the documents inside the drawer. The sound from outside became increasingly louder. The sound from outside became increasingly louder. I kept rereading the message to understand it better. I kept rereading the message to understand it better. She paused briefly before changing the subject. She paused briefly before changing the subject. The elevator felt slower than usual this evening. The elevator felt slower than usual this evening. I accidentally left my jacket in the other room. I accidentally left my jacket in the other room. That response didn't sound completely honest to me. That response didn't sound completely honest to me. He looked around quietly, as if searching for someone. He looked around quietly, as if searching for someone. The lights flickered twice during the presentation. The lights flickered twice during the presentation. I didn't realize how far we had walked. I didn't realize how far we had walked. She lowered her voice. When mentioning his name, she lowered her voice. When mentioning his name, the entire building felt colder than before. The entire building felt colder than before. I wasn't prepared for that unexpected announcement. I wasn't prepared for that unexpected announcement. He opened the door slowly, without making any noise. He opened the door slowly, without making any noise. The discussion became more serious after that point. The discussion became more serious after that point. I could hear quiet laughter from the next table. I could hear quiet laughter from the next table. She stared at the screen for several silent seconds. She stared at the screen for several silent seconds. The atmosphere inside the car felt unusually tense. The atmosphere inside the car felt unusually tense. The proposal sounded convincing at first, yet several details seemed intentionally vague. The proposal sounded convincing at first, yet several details seemed intentionally vague. I would have responded differently if the circumstances had been clearer. I would have responded differently if the circumstances had been clearer. She maintained eye contact calmly, despite the growing tension in the room. She maintained eye contact calmly, despite the growing tension in the room. The conversation gradually shifted from casual remarks to serious concerns. The conversation gradually shifted from casual remarks to serious concerns. He seemed reluctant to elaborate further, for reasons nobody understood. He seemed reluctant to elaborate further, for reasons nobody understood. The atmosphere became increasingly uncomfortable after the unexpected interruption. The atmosphere became increasingly uncomfortable after the unexpected interruption. I couldn't entirely determine whether his reaction was genuine or rehearsed. I couldn't entirely determine whether his reaction was genuine or rehearsed. She quietly acknowledged the criticism without appearing defensive at all. She quietly acknowledged the criticism without appearing defensive at all. The explanation raised concerns that hadn't previously crossed my mind. The explanation raised concerns that hadn't previously crossed my mind. He deliberately avoided answering directly, whenever the topic became sensitive. He deliberately avoided answering directly whenever the topic became sensitive. The situation escalated faster than anyone had initially anticipated. The situation escalated faster than anyone had initially anticipated. I found it difficult to concentrate, given the constant distractions around us. I found it difficult to concentrate, given the constant distractions around us. She appeared remarkably calm, considering the amount of pressure involved. She appeared remarkably calm, considering the amount of pressure involved. The announcement generated confusion among those who hadn't been informed earlier. The announcement generated confusion among those who hadn't been informed earlier. I was under the impression that the issue had already been resolved. I was under the impression that the issue had already been resolved. His response implied far more than his actual words revealed. His response implied far more than his actual words revealed. The meeting continued longer than expected due to several unresolved disagreements. The meeting continued longer than expected due to several unresolved disagreements. She subtly changed the subject before the discussion became too personal. She subtly changed the subject before the discussion became too personal. I couldn't help noticing how unusually quiet the entire building felt. I couldn't help noticing how unusually quiet the entire building felt. The misunderstanding could have been avoided with clearer communication beforehand. The misunderstanding could have been avoided with clearer communication beforehand. He reacted cautiously, as though he were anticipating further complications. He reacted cautiously, as though he were anticipating further complications. The overall atmosphere felt strangely formal, despite the casual setting. The overall atmosphere felt strangely formal, despite the casual setting. I had every intention of leaving earlier, but circumstances unexpectedly changed. I had every intention of leaving earlier, but circumstances unexpectedly changed. She spoke with remarkable confidence, even while facing difficult questions. She spoke with remarkable confidence, even while facing difficult questions. The delay created unnecessary confusion among several members of the team. The delay created unnecessary confusion among several members of the team. I wasn't entirely comfortable with the direction the discussion was taking. I wasn't entirely comfortable with the direction the discussion was taking. He paused momentarily, seemingly reconsidering what he was about to say. He paused momentarily, seemingly reconsidering what he was about to say. The situation became significantly more complicated after additional details emerged. The situation became significantly more complicated after additional details emerged. She responded thoughtfully, rather than reacting emotionally in the moment. She responded thoughtfully, rather than reacting emotionally in the moment. I found the explanation somewhat inconsistent with the earlier statements provided. I found the explanation somewhat inconsistent with the earlier statements provided. The audience remained unusually attentive throughout the entire presentation. The audience remained unusually attentive throughout the entire presentation. He expressed his concerns carefully to avoid creating further misunderstandings. He expressed his concerns carefully to avoid creating further misunderstandings. The conversation unexpectedly revealed several previously overlooked issues. The conversation unexpectedly revealed several previously overlooked issues. I would rather postpone the discussion than make a rushed decision. I would rather postpone the discussion than make a rushed decision. She handled the criticism gracefully, without losing her composure whatsoever. She handled the criticism gracefully, without losing her composure whatsoever. The circumstances surrounding the incident remained frustratingly unclear. The circumstances surrounding the incident remained frustratingly unclear. I couldn't immediately determine whether the statement was intended seriously. I couldn't immediately determine whether the statement was intended seriously. He maintained a professional tone, despite the increasingly difficult conversation. He maintained a professional tone, despite the increasingly difficult conversation. The unexpected announcement noticeably altered everyone's mood in the room. The unexpected announcement noticeably altered everyone's mood in the room. I was somewhat surprised by how quickly opinions began to change. I was somewhat surprised by how quickly opinions began to change. She appeared slightly distracted throughout the latter half of the meeting. She appeared slightly distracted throughout the latter half of the meeting. The entire discussion felt more complicated than it initially appeared. The entire discussion felt more complicated than it initially appeared. I had assumed the process would be simpler. under the circumstances. I had assumed the process would be simpler under the circumstances. He carefully considered every possibility before responding to the question. He carefully considered every possibility before responding to the question. The silence that followed felt considerably more uncomfortable than expected. The silence that followed felt considerably more uncomfortable than expected. I wasn't fully convinced by the reasoning behind the decision. I wasn't fully convinced by the reasoning behind the decision. She acknowledged the mistake professionally instead of denying responsibility. She acknowledged the mistake professionally instead of denying responsibility. The conversation gradually lost direction after several interruptions occurred. The conversation gradually lost direction after several interruptions occurred. I found his explanation surprisingly detailed, given the limited information available. I found his explanation surprisingly detailed, given the limited information available. The atmosphere remained tense, even after the discussion had officially ended. The atmosphere remained tense, even after the discussion had officially ended. I wasn't aware that the schedule had changed again. I wasn't aware that the schedule had changed again. She quietly moved aside to let everyone pass. She quietly moved aside to let everyone pass. The movie turned out better than I expected. The movie turned out better than I expected. He sounded tired during the phone conversation. He sounded tired during the phone conversation. I nearly forgot to charge my phone before leaving. I nearly forgot to charge my phone before leaving. The room became quieter after everyone sat down. The room became quieter after everyone sat down. She gave me a confused look. Without saying anything, she gave me a confused look. Without saying anything. The traffic seemed unusually heavy this evening. The traffic seemed unusually heavy this evening. I couldn't hear clearly because of the loud music. I couldn't hear clearly because of the loud music. He waited patiently near the entrance for several minutes. He waited patiently near the entrance for several minutes. The conversation became awkward after that sudden question. The conversation became awkward after that sudden question. I accidentally opened the wrong file during the meeting. I accidentally opened the wrong file during the meeting. She looked more relaxed. After hearing the news, she looked more relaxed. After hearing the news, the restaurant was almost empty when we arrived there. The restaurant was almost empty when we arrived there. I kept checking my watch during the long discussion. I kept checking my watch during the long discussion. He carefully read the message before replying calmly. He carefully read the message before replying calmly. The weather felt colder near the beach area. The weather felt colder near the beach area. I wasn't expecting such a quick response from him. I wasn't expecting such a quick response from him. She slowly placed the cup back on the table. She slowly placed the cup back on the table. The hallway looked brighter after the lights turned on. The hallway looked brighter after the lights turned on. I couldn't understand why everyone suddenly became silent. I couldn't understand why everyone suddenly became silent. He seemed distracted throughout the entire conversation. He seemed distracted throughout the entire conversation. The line outside moved slower than usual today. The line outside moved slower than usual today. I almost missed the announcement because I was distracted. I almost missed the announcement because I was distracted. She quietly closed the door behind her. She quietly closed the door behind her. The cafe smelled strongly of fresh coffee beans. The cafe smelled strongly of fresh coffee beans. I noticed something unusual near the parking area. I noticed something unusual near the parking area. He responded politely, even though he seemed annoyed. He responded politely, even though he seemed annoyed. The meeting started later than everyone expected. The meeting started later than everyone expected. I couldn't remember where I had placed my keys. I couldn't remember where I had placed my keys. She paused briefly before answering the question. She paused briefly before answering the question. The atmosphere inside the room felt surprisingly calm. The atmosphere inside the room felt surprisingly calm. And now, take a small moment and notice something. You understood more English today just by listening and repeating slowly. That is the power of shadowing. Small practice. Again and again. You do not need perfect grammar immediately. You only need daily repetition and patience. The more you hear English, the more naturally your brain remembers it. Little by little, your speaking becomes smoother, your listening becomes clearer, and your confidence grows quietly. So keep practicing every day, even for a few minutes. Speak slowly, listen carefully, and trust the process. And if this practice helped you feel more confident, you can like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more calm English shadowing practice. Take care, and I'll see you in the next lesson.